Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Steve Carr, the founder and the principal operating officer, the guy with the big brain about market traction and talking IoT. I'm purposely describing Steve this way today because if I asked AI to describe Steve, maybe, just maybe, it might come up with something similar. There's a reason why Steve is on this show today, and it's about artificial intelligence and deep seek. Okay. My name is Bolaji Ojo, managing editor of the Ojo Yoshida Report. And like I said, I'm here today to talk with Steve. We had a lot of things planned, Steve, right? About AI.
Yeah.
We've had topics laid out. We have, we've already planned about 6 months worth of talking materials. And then all of a sudden, DeepSeek came in and everything went upside down. So let's talk DeepSeek, right? From China, of all places. Talk to me about it.
Thanks, Balaji, and thanks for the introductory to the show. Yeah, I mean, the world turned on its head on the 20th of January. I think
Hmm.
two things happened on that day. We had Trump come in. It was his inaugural day on the 20th. On the same day, DeepSeek got actually launched, and I think now it's the number one, or was the number one downloaded app on the App Store, which is kind of crazy. So it's been blowing everything out of the water completely. But I guess it's one of these scenarios as to why is it interesting, and a little bit who are they? And I think the question maybe we should be asking ourselves is it democratizing AI? Right?
Hmm.
We've seen Nvidia stock price fall by what? I think it's the best part of $600 billion.
That's right.
It's huge, right? It's huge, and
Over $1 trillion lost, more than $1 trillion lost in US on the US stock exchanges for companies related to AI in just a couple of days between yesterday and today.
yeah, the Mag Seven as they call them, right? So the big seven that are out there now. I mean, should we be panicking about it? It's one of the questions that people are asking themselves in terms of those level of investments. Now, I'm going to argue potentially not, and I'm also going to maybe discuss the fact that this actually could be that democratizing moment as it moves forward. For me, what was really, really interesting is DeepSeek itself wasn't an AI company. The guys that are actually involved are quantitative investors. Okay, so they're financial investors. So they use the technology that we all love to talk about in terms of the chips to actually help build algorithms to help from an investment standpoint. If any of your listeners want to go out there and read about it, that you'll actually find that they actually state that they had some spare chip capacity, and they decided to produce their own LLM, so the large language model. And I think that's really quite interesting that you've got some quant guys that have suddenly, in a very short period of time, an exceptionally low cost, are now out there competing with the likes of OpenAI and Chat. You know,
So, say, let's first pull back and just let's explain to the audience what exactly is DeepSeek. What does it compare with? I think you mentioned OpenAI now and ChatGPT, right? But let's start. You also try to say, look, these guys just said, look, we've got all this extra capacity. Let's just use it for
yep.
DeepSeek. So, what is DeepSeek?
Yeah, so DeepSeek is effectively it's very similar to OpenAI or GPT-4 as people would see it. So it's a large language model. It's a reasoning model. Okay, so it allows you to type a question in and it will give you an answer. It is different to some of the other models that are out there in terms of how it does it, because it actually looks like and feels like there's a thought process around it. So it's what we tend to regard as AGI. So that's artificial
Hmm.
general intelligence. So it kind of looks at things in a slightly different way. What's really interesting though is it's actually trained itself on the back of OpenAI, right? So what it's actually done is it's gone into ChatGPT, and it's been pinging it with questions after question after question after question, okay, to build up its own training models. And this could be one of the reasons why the cost to train the model was so low.
Steve, the reality is that that's not being pointed out by a lot of people. DeepSeek didn't just come to market on its own. It came in, it piggybacked on OpenAI. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, of course. And if you look at the well, I think the easiest way to look at it is that if you look at the way the models are taught. Okay, we will talk about AI training models. So there are two aspects
Okay.
to AI to consider. You've got the training model, which is what we'll hear about costing hundreds of millions. I think the early GPT model was 80 million, and the later model was 123 million. And you'll hear of these same kind of numbers being thrown out there from Gemini and some of the other models that are out there. But in essence, there's no moat. What I mean by that, there's no protection. So the barriers to entry to come in and have a lower cost training model is relatively straightforward. And this is what DeepSeek have actually leveraged. What they've done is that they've used what's already out there to help train their own models. So they're not doing it completely from scratch. So if you like, and I hate referring to it this way around, especially given the fact they're a Chinese company, it's the classic reverse engineering, right? So something's already out there. Why don't you ask it how it's pulled itself together? Why don't you try and copy what's already out there
Hmm.
and speed up your process to market? And in essence, that's what they've done. So they've not gone out and had to spend that same level of money to train. They're actually using what's already out there to train, but they're using also, I mentioned it before, AGI. So it's much more of a thought process to what it's doing. So it's not actually really thinking, but the way it's constructed is it pulls together arguments in a much more cohesive manner, so it can give you faster answers to the questions that you've actually got out there.
In other words, without OpenAI, maybe there won't be DeepSeek.
Potentially, yes. Potentially, yes. I mean, I think that's really.
At least not at the scale it is now, and
I,
probably not causing as much as much of the confusion that it's causing now.
I think there are two elements in there. I mean, one, the model was trained on some of the Nvidia H100 chips. They
Okay.
reckon just over 2,000 chips to actually train the model, which is ridiculously low. Now you could ask yourself a question, and there are people out there that are stating, is it real, right? Because if you try and download the app today, you won't be able to get into it. It'll talk about people attacking the site, malicious malware being put into the site or oversubscribed. So did it really train its model with 2,000 chips? Did it really cost the $5.6 million that they're talking about? All of these things come into question, right? Especially given the fact that it was, in my opinion, launched on the same day as we saw the inauguration. And leading up to the inauguration, we also had all the talk about, America being the lead AI place to be from a development standpoint and an evolution standpoint. So there is an element here that says, we can do whatever you can do, and we've got what you've got, and look what we can do. So you actually, you know what, we're not behind. We're at least level with you, if not actually creeping ahead. Is some of that rhetoric? Is some of that positioning? Don't know. But what we do know is that whenever that happens, you normally get an acceleration in technology. So, even though we've
Yes.
seen this massive decline in terms of stock values, and as you say, $1 trillion off of the Mag 7, if you like, and obviously the biggest loser there currently being Nvidia. I'm
Mhm.
not so concerned about where these companies are today, because they will just accelerate at a faster rate, and they'll very quickly ascertain whether or not the whole DeepSeek story is as it would suggest it is. I mean, for all we know, they could have been using more chips, right? You know, they
Right, right,
they they
right.
talk about 2,000, just over 2,000 chips, but remember there are export embargoes, so maybe they could only talk to the 2,000 chips based on those embargoes. We don't know, and we're not going to know.
You know, I've always not been I've not always not been in favor of conspiracy theories and stuff like that. But when you put all of this together, when you think about how DeepSeek came, kind of just like out of the blues, and the right time and the timing, and all of that, I'm beginning to be suspicious of this whole scenario, and also if we base it on what you've just discussed now. So if we put aside the conspiracy theories and then we ask this fundamental question, where does DeepSeek go from here? What does it
Yeah,
mean?
I mean, that's a great question, and the model's got restrictions to it as well. Bear in mind, okay. So there are clearly political questions that you can ask it that it won't answer. For obvious reasons. So there's still that higher level of control. I think the other thing to bear in mind is it doesn't also come with the same level of accuracy or numeric accuracy as some of the other models. So it is a lighter model in some respects from that standpoint. I think what it's done is it's proved that you can train a model at relatively low cost. And actually, whether we talk a little bit at the start and tongue-in-cheek conspiracy theory type approach, if you park that all to one side, this is really more an argument around open source versus proprietary. If you think of OpenAI, when it started, OpenAI was going to be open to everybody,
open
right?
Open source, yeah, right.
Non-for-profit type approach to what it was doing, and very quickly that span. But the reason it span was really down to inference, and I'll come on to what I mean by that. Kind of going forward. But what DeepSeek have actually done is they've said, well, we'll make it open. Okay, this isn't completely open source. It's available. You can go on GitHub, download it, do whatever you want to do with what they've got there. And really, I think there's an element of positioning here which says, as I mentioned before, we can do it, and we did it in a year. We did it. Company was 2012, 2023, so we're 2025 now, maybe just over a year. But we've managed to do it at a lower cost, lower power requirements for doing it. We're training off of some of the existing model. It feels like a bit like a doppelganger, I suppose, of OpenAI in some respects. But there are other companies out there that do need to look at that and be concerned. We talked about what's been wiped off the share prices of the Mag 7. But what about other companies out there that are in their process of developing their own solutions, their own LLM type solutions? This has made it very affordable now for people to go and do their own stuff at a very low cost, which is why I talk about, does it begin to democratize that space? That's going to be the question ultimately that we're going to have to answer. So
now part of the panic is the fact that DeepSeek came out of China. Let's assume that it was a UK enterprise that did this. Maybe we will approach the analysis and the impact on the stock market differently. Let's even say the impact on the stock market is the same, because now we're talking about the fact that this is possible, and you don't have to spend as much money potentially on achieving this. Will this panic level be as high if it was done by a member of the so-called Western community nations?
I think the panic probably less so. I think the impact, you've got to consider that really relates more to a CapEx type scenario. Because if you start looking at it, I'm an investor and I invest in a company, and suddenly that company tells me it needs to go and spend $200 million to continue to develop a model, and somebody else is doing it for $5.6 million, as an example. Do I feel that my investment is safe in that environment? Yes or no? What am I going to do to actually change that? Right? How do I, what's my thought process? So my chances then, I'm probably going to run, or I'm probably going to look at where else I invest. Part of the irony, in my opinion, here is if you look at Nvidia, the market's still going to need chips. The market's still going to need data centers, irrespective of what anybody says around, okay, yes, this is now a low-cost model. And how do we position ourselves still to win? Well, the person who's got most compute power ultimately will be the person that wins. And why is that important? When it comes back down to inferencing. So it comes back down to, I asked a question. So in theory, you're using tokens, and there's a cost associated to that, right? Yeah. So the more compute power I've got, the better I am at inferencing, the faster I can respond, and the more accurately I can get there. So there isn't going to be this sudden, I don't believe, a scenario where, oh, well, we don't need these chips. I think the argument is we don't need these chips the same way we needed them before for the training element of what we're doing. We are still going to need them for inference, right? And inference is probably the most expensive element that you come across in terms, post training and deployment. So I think that's key. So I think, there is a hardware element here that we can't get away from, right? The hardware elements really quite critical and quite key moving forward. And there has been a bit of a panic. And I think Nvidia have taken the brunt of that in terms of their stock price. Am I overly concerned where they're at? Not really, because I think they'll come bouncing back upon that for the reasons that I've just said, because it is a capex play from an investment standpoint. What I do see is the ability for companies now to think about how do they train their models at this lower cost. So does that make it suddenly more commercially available? We've spoken before about ProServe models and other models in terms of how organizations would implement AI in terms of their own type solutions. This is making it feel significantly more affordable to go train, to go deploy, to go move stuff forward. So from that viewpoint, there could still be a high demand, or there still will be a high demand for chips as we move forward. Absolutely, no doubt. But it is a capex argument. So would the market have gone down as much? Probably not. Would it have gone down? I'm sure it would have done. But you can go back to the old quote, Balaji, constraint breeds innovation. And when you constrain a market or you constrain individuals, they find solutions that maybe you didn't think existed before. So DeepSeek could have done that. And this could be a way of really democratizing what's happening, reducing the costs generally of AI training and model training. But you do have to wonder the impact it will have on GPT or Chat 4.0 in terms of where it's at, because it's given the same kind of performance today.
It's within the same period of time that the new president of the United States came up and said he would like to spearhead the raising of $500 billion. So you have companies like OpenAI that's involved. You have the Japanese company also, the one that owns shares in ARM, that's also involved and all of that. And then you have this other discussion on the side from Elon Musk saying that these guys just don't have the money. You talked about the capex play. From the American president's point of view, it's all about the capex play. Who can throw in the most money and energize the innovations that's already available? And now we have a company coming up to say, well, look, we can leapfrog. We don't need to have quite as much money, right? On the other hand, though, you still need to rely on the chips. And those chips are not just going to drop in value simply because, you can't supply enough of them now. Nvidia can't supply enough of them. Why should it drop prices? And the CUDA software behind it, it's still significantly a major part of this. At the same time, though, Steve, you and I have talked in the past where you basically made it clear that some of these things can be done at a cheaper price.
For sure.
I don't see how DeepSeek will have surprised you, knowing some of the things we have discussed in the past and how it is possible to do it at a cheaper level, but you still need those chips, like you said earlier on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And no, it doesn't. You could almost argue, and I'm going to put this somewhat out of context, but I know you'll understand what I mean. It's almost a Moore's law effect in some respects, but actually around the kind of training type models and training type solution on it. I think, it's no surprise that leapfrog technology will exist. It always has done and always will do. Somebody will always find a more inexpensive way to do what you've done before. So being the pathfinder isn't always the best place to be, unless you can produce significant barriers to entry, or you can soak up enough of the market as early as you possibly can and as fast as you possibly can. I mean, we're still somewhat in the Wild West when it comes to AI, right, in terms of legislation and everything else. So, it feels, that we've still got a long way to go in terms of where it is. And regulating it, on the one hand, you'd look at it and say regulation could be a good thing. On the other hand, people developing the products and solutions will look there and say it's a bad thing and will actually, kind of constrain the market. I think my biggest concern for the market is how does the market now develop going forward? Because in theory, what you've done is you've produced something, or what DeepSeek have done is produce something which is relatively cheap from a training perspective and has blown everybody else away in terms of what they've been able to do. And of course, we'll need to watch it to see how accurate it is, and it's too early days to really turn around and say, okay, it is exactly as they say it is on the box. So there's always those doubts around that, and we'll see over time. But we are still going to need a huge level of investment to move up the AI food chain, if you like. I talked a bit about AGI, so it's artificial general intelligence. So that's using a thing called COT. So that's kind of chain of thought. So it's where the AI appears to be reasoning, okay, with its solution. So that takes it up a different level from stuff we've seen before. And we've spoken before about the different types of AI, and right at the basic level for, I guess, the consumer at home would be ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence. So that's your Alexas, your Siris of the world, right? Which are very, very narrow in what they do. But the next big step has got to be super intelligence, so artificial super intelligence. And what that is going to require is the ability to really begin to understand physics. Okay. And now you're going to get into a point where you've got something that can potentially think and reason better than the human mind. But in order to get there, you're going to have to spend significant amounts of money, right? Again, on the various training models and everything else. So what we're really seeing today is we've seen a massive apparent cost reduction in what I would term maybe generative AI and AGI. But actually, there is still that next step to go. It's a bit like the space race, right? None of us have reached Mars yet, okay, in theory, right? So we're not living there. We're not doing this. But actually, if we spend enough money, can we get there? And I do think that DeepSeek have almost thrown down the gauntlet. Look, we can do this. If you're sitting out there and you're one of those guys, if you're an open AI or you're in the administration in the US that's focused in and around this, you're going to be thinking, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to work just as hard and we're going to get there before you in terms of that next level. So it's a little bit like the space race, I guess, around AI. And I find that quite fascinating to see actually how that's going to drive out and move forward, because that is the next level we need to get to. If the cost has come down, fantastic. And, we talked about the fact people still need the chips. We can't supply the chips. So therefore, why would we reduce the price on the chips? You and I both know that eventually, as things become mass deployed, all that happens is the values will drop off, and there will be a way of producing and shipping the volumes that are required. But that next step forward is going to require a different level of technology. It's going to require a different level of training. It's going to require a different level of investment. I don't think that's going to be so easy for somebody to moat jump, if you like. I think it's going to be a harder barrier to entry, and I think people are going to struggle to do that.
So if I take what you just said now, and I look at the companies whose values fell, those ones that had a sharp decline in their values on Wall Street, I've always felt something about investors. They don't always get it right, but these guys are good 90% plus of the times. And sometimes they do this, because they can see that far ahead. So let me do my analysis of what happened this last week. You had a situation where some company, you had this run up in stock prices. That's one scenario. And it's like, whoa, there's a big bad wolf for the door. Let's take some profit and take it and run away. Okay. And that's going to happen. I believe that's going to happen. The second scenario is big bad wolf at the door. The house is not well built. This thing is going to collapse. Okay, so we got to run. All right, and that's scenario number two. Scenario number three is where big bad wolf is at the door and things are bad, but the fundamentals of these companies are great. They are going to participate in that next level of ASI, artificial super intelligence. I believe they're going to participate. And so you have somebody like myself, okay, come in and say, you know what, give me more of Nvidia. All right, to be honest, I don't own any shares in Nvidia now, and I don't have the money to buy shares in Nvidia. But if I did, I would say, okay, you know what, I still think that Steve Carr is right. These companies are still going to participate in the hardware and in the software and in the development of the applications and the next generation of AI, which is ASI. and I believe in them and I'm going to invest in them. Is that the case, Steve, for
Yeah,
these
I,
companies?
I would completely agree with what you're saying there. I think the other element to it is you also have to look at their reach in terms of consumer as well, right? Because that's the other side of it. Because when we talk about the decline across the Mag 7, a number of those companies have a massive global reach in terms of their own customer base or the end consumer base. So
Yes.
they have that access level there as well. So I also think, dare I say it, that the global economics that we've experienced over the last few years have led people to look for short-term gains while they're investing as well. So we've not had that long-term mentality. And part of that's been inflationary led, right? If I've got money in savings, why would I leave it in savings? I might as well try and invest somewhere and get a better return on it. And of course, you've had a bit of a ride early days when you saw the share prices going up around all companies involved in AI. So it really shouldn't be a surprise that at some point something like this is going to happen, right? Somebody else is going to come in, the competition is going to change, the landscape's going to evolve, and you're just going to have to, get back into your war rooms and effectively figure out what that next course of action is going to be. And I think, the Mag 7 will all be doing that, I'm sure, already today, and will come out of this and continue to be dominant in terms of what they're doing. I don't see it any other way. Nvidia are the dominant chip player. That isn't suddenly going to change. All right. Bear in mind also that, the embargo is in play, and the chips that were used clearly were there before the embargo. They may have used more. We don't know. They're stating the 2048 chips that they're using. But they've got to have to get their hands on more products and more devices and more chips. It wasn't built on Chinese chips. DeepSeek didn't train on Chinese chips. It trained on Nvidia devices. So there is that element to it as well. Do they have that capability already or not? I guess we'll find out over time. I think personally, this is a little bit more of, you think you're ahead, we're going to show you that you're not. Okay, so this is more.
We can catch up, or we've caught up.
Yeah, we've caught up. It's brinksmanship, right? We've caught up. So you thought you were that far ahead. We're here, and you should take note, right?
But Steve, one thing, there's this whole concept of, you think you're ahead, we've caught up, and there's the reverse part of it, which is, you think you've caught up, I'm really, really farther away than you think. You're still chasing my shadow. Is that a good analogy for the American, the way America is now, and American enterprises in AI?
I think that the industry over there will accelerate at a really fast rate, and will do exactly what you've just said, right? I think when you look at something which suddenly goes out from DeepSeek, it suddenly was number one for the app downloads, everything else. Kind of cool, looks and feels a bit different, feels a little bit more personal when it responds to you in terms of the language and stuff it uses. All great, fantastic. But is there any more behind it? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. We don't know, right? And that time will tell. I think if they were ahead, we'd know they're ahead. Why would they not show they're ahead, right? Because, as I say, why would you put it out? Why would you put it out on Jan 20th as well? I mean, it was an important day. There's all of those, as you say at the start, kind of conspiracy theories on it. But looking at it purely from a technical standpoint, and as you know, I love the tech, is I think that, constraint did drive innovation. So they've clearly done something which is super cool. I think that will now, if you like, put a kick into the companies in the Mag 7 to say, okay, we need to accelerate and do something different at a faster rate. I think the investment is there for them to go do that. And I do think they have that ability to go forward in terms of maybe, driving towards the ASI type environment. However, they are going to need cash in order to do that, right? So when you get a flight of your shareholders, that does make it slightly more difficult to raise that level of money. But I also think there is an investor naivety, and I don't mean I'm not saying that investors are stupid or anything, but I think, you know, they see OpenAI, they see ChatGPT. That's the typical package people are using out there today, and they see something else that can do the same, and they maybe don't have the concept of the roadmap to what's going to come next or how that's going to break down, right? And then, of course, training is just one aspect of AI. The inferencing, you know, how you get the responses, the costs of doing that, everything else associated to that, the speed, all of that stuff's critically important if you want to be in that prime market position. And I think that's the next element that people will focus around.
You know, maybe I should make this my last question, you know, because we could continue this all day long. There are just so many elements of this to consider. If you take a look at the automotive market, where you had the likes of Toyota and Mercedes-Benz and BMW and GM and Ford, Chrysler, all of these companies, Nissan, they was and even Tesla eventually they were so dominant, and they still are major players in this market. And then you have Chinese companies like BYD just come along, and it's like, whoa, you know what, you guys are so much better, and but you can't sell your cars over here and all that stuff, but we still like what you're producing. When I think about AI and its development so far, are we in danger? Because that's the sense that DeepSeek suddenly threw. It's a wrench it's thrown into the works now. Western companies, American companies, European companies, Japanese, Korean companies, are they suddenly in danger of the leadership? That's one. The other question is this, which probably should have come first. What the heck is wrong with us? Why is all this race? Why do we have this polarized existence that you can have DeepSeek just suddenly come out of the blues when we could have known about it all the while, when we could all collaborate? What is the heck's wrong with us with all these this competitive, crazy competitive environment where we can all drive towards the achievement of this ASI and all benefit from it rather than one trying to keep the other down?
I think that the yellow part of the answer to the second question, and there's fear, right? Because what it can do for good, it can do for bad. So there is a natural level of fear, and that's always going to be in play. You know, we've talked before about the ethics of it, so all of that stuff absolutely does come into play. In terms of positioning, does it worry me where China are and what they're doing? Absolutely, yes. For, you know, you mentioned the automotive market, you mentioned like the likes of a BYD. Just think of their battery technologies and stuff that are actually in there as well. So absolutely, yes, it does. And you can reference back to, and I can't remember the exact time, but I know Zuckerberg kind of made that quote about, you know, China has got more geniuses than, you know, some countries have got a population, right? So,
Right.
you know, we know that they're going to continue to develop, and we know that they're going to throw whatever money they need to throw at it internally in order to get it done. So, you know, from that viewpoint, we have to look at them seriously, and we have to consider that they could do it. But I go back to what I said earlier. It's a bit like the space race, right? This could actually be really cool because it could accelerate everything that we're seeing in and around AI going forward. We're moving very near term into that kind of reasoning AI, the AGI, the kind of artificial general intelligence on stuff. When we move to ASI, or we start getting into that area, as I say, you're starting to look at physics, right? You're starting to look at kind of molecular structures and stuff and everything else. It's a whole different world of training and a whole level above where we are today. Whoever gets there first, that's where, you know, if you like, that's where the prize is.
Well, like I said, Steve, we could continue this conversation. In some ways, I'm kind of like, I was happy that DeepSeek came out. I was also bummed by this announcement of this $500 billion in this and that, because it just seemed like some overblown, kind of like kid in the playground, fantasy idea of, you know, we can just bury everybody because we have so much money and we can put all these resources together. And it turns out that it's not just the resources that you can put together, it's the drive behind it. So now that we have DeepSeek, I'm going to ask you this, and we can wrap up, Steve. What else is going to come at us from out of left field?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there will be other models that will drop out of China. If we think DeepSeek is the only organization that's working that stuff up, I think we have to be kidding ourselves from that viewpoint.
Yeah,
I also think there's going to be rhetoric and false claims maybe around the evolution towards ASI. So I think, where people are or not, I don't actually know, and I don't think we'll ever know from a kind of looking in from the outside view, especially on China.
okay.
One of the questions I do ask myself, though, is given the fact that, yes, it was #1 download on the App Store, but you now can't get into it. They're talking about people attacking their site and other stuff. Is it really as robust as maybe was suggested it was? Don't know. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see another 3 or 4 Chinese AI companies suddenly pop up in the very short time. And from my viewpoint, I think it's it's Sam Altman and crew that are the ones that really have to figure out how they accelerate that next path going forward. I am invested a little bit in Nvidia, and I'm okay about it. I don't see that as a major concern at this point, and I wouldn't be running from it. I think that will come back. I do think the losses are artificial, just based upon a headline. So we'll see.
Well, Steve Carr, he is the founder of Market Traction and Talking IoT. We've been talking DeepSeek, the Chinese AI company that's just taking the world by storm. My suspicion is that we're going to be revisiting this topic, probably with other companies very, very soon. In addition, Steve will also be taking us through, the next generations of AI and, what's going on, what's happening actually in the AI spectrum. We're going to be having regular discussions on this. I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about DeepSeek.
Not a problem, Balaji. Always appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.